All right, so we're just chilling out. This is our first attempt at a Skype style podcast interview situation.
You've already ruined it.
Oh man.
Start
All right, well,
over.
why don't you start it then? How about that?
Uh, Questions.
Yeah, I do have some questions. Actually, they're
Yeah,
questions about questions.
just like boom, boom, boom. Fire them
Yeah,
off.
ever since we kind of started doing some of this informational type stuff, I've been getting a lot of questions from former students, just trying to figure out, they're at a point in their lives where they're transitioning from marching into the real world, and there's a lot of them that look up to what we do and that look up to others in the activity and that want to pursue, you know, writing and teaching and stuff like that. So I get a lot of like, hey, what do I do? Should I do this and make a website and start writing, or should I, teach a bunch of schools? And, just wanted to kind of chat about that. Like, how do you approach giving life advice? Because I feel like as soon as I start talking about it, it becomes real anecdotal. Because I mean, I feel like I stumbled into what we do. Like it wasn't, there is no path. It would just stumble.
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I
Or are
am
you just
asking you.
pondering
Like,
the thought?
I'm just kind of thinking out loud. I'm trying to figure out in general how to give advice that isn't just generic, because it's so personal. Like we have all a personal
Right.
experience with how we got to where we are.
That's why it's so important to share your philosophy, not as, hey, this is how I think you should do it. Like, hey, I have my life together. Why don't you get your life together? No one has their life together. But if you talk about why you make the decisions you make, what led you to doing certain things, as opposed or abandoning certain things, ignoring certain things, because that can be just as important. Shut that off. But yeah, that's why I'm a huge, like, I guess, advocate of sharing philosophy. So you're not just sharing the nuts and bolts and the tactics or like the pragmatism of everyday life, but something bigger. And then to me, that I don't even know if it's advice, because advice, it doesn't feel like advice. It's more like you're just sharing. You're not telling someone what to do.
Right.
You're just sharing, and they can use it however they want. And the bigger, the more macro it is, I think the more universal it could be, depending on who's consuming it. So, but I mean, it depends on what the question is too. It could be like, how do you make 9 lits over the bar line in Sibelius, and then of course it's nuts and bolts. But
Right.
you know, why why are all your shows so sad? Um, that's a tougher one to answer, and you don't want to answer it with something really specific. It's
Well,
I just ask myself a question.
I distinctly remember being at a position where, I had other instructors and all these lofty careers that I looked up to, and I was like, oh, I want to do that one day. And I do feel like at some point people, that we've taught look at what we're doing. They're like, oh, I want to do that in one way or another. And the tricky thing, I guess, is to figure out, well, are you sure you want to do exactly this? Because, it's a really weird thing that we do. And number one, and number two, it's like what we're doing now is so different than the kind of life that I was living 10 years ago when I was kind of starting out doing this. It's almost like, well, if I was going to give you advice based on my trajectory, I'd almost be telling you to do things that are completely opposite of what I'm doing now. They're like the amount of gigs that I'm taking and the way that I comport my lifestyle is totally different right now at 39 than it was, at 25. And It's, I don't know. Do you feel that sometimes when you're trying to answer some of these questions? Are you like time traveling?
Well, I think to get away from the specifics of what we do, but I mean, because what is it? What are we doing? And I think what we're doing is we've found a niche that where you can be really expressive, and it's a very it I don't want to say fragile, but it's this weird place that we're sitting like almost like just on the edge of the fence of we are educators and everything is for and about the students, and that's what drives us. And then there's the other side, which I mean we can label it the selfish side, even though I'm not sure that's the right word, but it's self-expression. It's I'm doing this for me. This is I'm composing, writing, creating stuff that I want to do, and the students are the recipients of that. So there's like which way is the right way and which way drives you, because I think the type of person that is 100% student driven is not what I am. That's not what drives me. And I think if you get to the bottom of that with whoever's asking you the question, then you can contribute to something that can be useful for them. Like, are you a creative type? If you're a creative type, do you feel like you always have to make stuff? Like, whether you're a musician or not, like, do you make your own home movies? Do you, fiddle on guitar? Do you mess around with Illustrator or some other sort of graphic design? Because if you are, well, then I feel like we have a lot to talk about. Like we can help in that way, at least help share the journey, the story of how we got here. And going back to the other thing I mentioned before, as far as like being student oriented, if somebody wants to do this because, hey, I love drumming and I want to be a better teacher and I want to teach my students and I want to have, the best ensembles. To me, that's a little more difficult to answer because it tends to be, well, it can tend to be very curriculum based, and you start to get into this like ecosystem it's already built, it's already there, it's predefined. Like you go to school, you get these credentials, and then you find that landing place wherever you end up, whether it's junior high, high school, collegiate, whatever. And then that's fulfilling for you. That's the thing that drives you. I don't know if I'd be able to answer those types of questions as much. I'm definitely more along, like, I feel like, we've talked about this before, but like I cheated in some way to be able to be creative for a living. Like I didn't follow the actual route that you're supposed to follow.
Do you feel like
that's what this activity has done for me, though?
Do you feel like the teacher side is something that you've developed because without that part of it, you wouldn't be able to be the creative?
Yeah, I think we should put context on that because it sounds really weird if you were to take like a little soundbite. But the context of it is that I feel that I'm doing more of a service to the students if I'm giving them a piece of me. Like, and it's totally vulnerable. It's like, hey, this could suck, but here it is. I put my heart into it, and I'm not going to pretend that I didn't. I'm not going to say, I just threw this thing together. It's like, no, I really tried, and if it sucks, that's horrible. It's a horrible feeling because, like, dang it, I tried and it didn't work. But
how long did it take you to cultivate that?
Well, that's the value in it. That's the gift. So it's like, it sounds weird to say it's not about the kids, it's not about the students, because I don't really mean it that way. But I mean it in like a if I'm trying to figure out like what like engine inside of me like is like what's driving that, what's pushing that. And at the end of the day, it's just being honest. I'm not thinking about being a teacher. Teaching is the byproduct. Like it's the symptom of, hey, I made this thing. Let's bring it to life together. Because like when I'm with the students and we're all in the same gym or in the same classroom, I feel like we're building like we have this giant set of Legos and we're making something together. And I happen to be the one with the instruction manual. And that's the dynamic. That's what's going on inside my head. And so in that respect, it is about teaching, but only because we took the first step of trying to create something.
Right.
Which is totally different. If you're a math teacher, that's not how you're thinking. You're not thinking that. You're thinking you want to share the wealth of knowledge that humankind has amassed over millennia. Yeah,
it's funny that you're talking about this because we've talked about this a lot where, we'll write shows for maybe groups that we're not intimately involved with, and we do our best and we put everything we have into them and we still try to make them amazing products. But there is something, we've talked about this before, there is something about knowing that you're writing something for the group that you have to teach it to, and that relationship creates, a different kind of product, not necessarily better or worse, but it's definitely a different brain chemistry. I feel like when you're writing it, because, I don't know how to describe that, but I feel like some of what you're talking about, where initially it feels like, oh, well, I didn't really get to what I'm doing by focusing on teaching, but it's almost like without that teaching component, what you're doing right now wouldn't have become, as refined.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because the teaching comes from, okay, I wrote this thing, and especially I'm viewing it through my 19 or 20-year-old eyes, and okay, I wrote this thing, and I think it's really cool, and how do I get these kids who aren't much younger than me, 19, 20 when I started writing. I started writing before that, but when I was finally at Mission Viejo, I was 19. And, you're teaching 16, you're teaching Adam Watts and Roger Carter and
Jeff.
Jeff Queen. So it's not like am I really teaching them? Because they're kind of awesome just the way they are. But to try to get them to understand the vision and how do we get this to happen? And there's, you start learning these tricks. Oh, well, this thing I wrote, clearly, you can't have the tenor's cold attack entering on the end of 3 just because it sounds good. You have to figure out a way that you, as you're, consuming the piece, that you experience it as being a cold attack on the end of 3, but it's not really, because it's been composed in such a way where there's a little bit of trickery in there given your environment. You're not in the studio recording things and being able to shift them around. So I think slight tangent, but I think it's kind of cool that we're talking about this. The composition contests just happened with SCPA and Arcadia Symposium, and I'm not on the judging committee. But I do hear the winners every year, and it would be really cool to try to connect with those future composers to say, hey, you can write this thing and it can be beautiful and it can be well thought out and just this masterpiece, but can you get somebody to play it?
Yeah, it's really funny because
That's the trick. You know what I mean? Like
I
that,
did
to me, that's
judge.
like, you know,
I was one of the judges on that, and the pieces were all fantastic. Like I'm imagining myself being 19 or 20 attempting to write, and like what was there blew me away. And at the same time, looking at the scores and listening to the music, I was distinctly, almost every instinct that I had was this is unplayable. Number one, number two, it's really cool, but what's the point? And I don't say that condescendingly, but it's like this natural instinct to look at. It's easier to look at the greater arc of something when you're not the one that wrote it, you know. And it's such a interesting thing to think about now, where you get so caught up in minutia of any given lick or any given bar or any given gesture, but then when you like, zooming out is a skill that takes a long time to develop, you know. And especially I think as a composer, like you get so excited about putting something on a piece of paper, you don't sometimes take a step back and look, oh, what is this whole thing trying to say? But it's really interesting that you're talking about that.
Yeah, and I feel I actually I got to hear one of these compositions from someone that missed the deadline, so it was okay for them to share it with me. And they said like, "Oh, I didn't turn it in," and so I got to listen to it, and it was super cool. I was actually blown away by it. But you're right. Like as I'm looking at it and I'm listening to it, because he was able to do a screen capture where I was watching the notes go by as I'm hearing it, and I'm looking at it. I couldn't help but saying, "That'll never happen. that would never happen. You'd have to change." And it wasn't far off though. It wasn't far off. It was like if you just like maybe add like 2 little eighth notes here, then it's playable, you know. Or it even adds another layer of complexity when you start thinking about, okay, now where are they when they play that?
Right.
Like either on the floor or on the field. How far apart are they? Are they behind the snare? Are they in front of the snare? You know, whatever the situation is. So it's all of those things that I think is the next level. Like the first level obviously is just composing, like opening the computer and creating something from scratch with the only inspiration you have is whatever's in your mind. And in that respect, it's amazing. It's awesome.
Well, there is magic to that because sometimes, you know, the flip side of that coin is maybe like for me, sometimes I overanalyze something and I go to write it and what's coming out is this analyzed, like sterile idea. And it's like, where's the joy? Where is the curiosity? Where is like just this, you know, like we could do whatever we want. And like that's a part of it too, you know? So I do sometimes feel like that could be a shackle in terms of like, oh, well, I've been through the ringer and I kind of can see all the mistakes 3 steps ahead. And so sometimes you just don't even try because, you know, you already know it's wrong.
Right. Well, back to the context of the students that are submitting compositions, I think it's the coolest thing ever. I wish we could do more of it. I wish WGI, I don't know if it's, I know they do the scholarships, but if there was some sort of, the way SCPA is doing it, and I don't know if there's any other circuits out there that do it. But it's such a cool thing to see. Like I learned so much about some of my students, and I didn't know they were that creative or they had other skill sets that have nothing to do with
hitting your dot
percussion, but they're integrating multimedia and all these other ideas, and that is amazing. Maybe just because I'm not on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, so I don't see it. Maybe it's out there and I'm just missing it. But I had like definitely like the big wow factor in just hearing the slight little snippets that I heard. And I hope there's more of it. I hope more people write or just create in general. And maybe even if we made categories where there's just no rules, it's like you want to write for whatever, even multimedia, like if it's some sort of video element or slideshow element or something, imagery. But yeah, I got excited when I got to hear those pieces, because I feel like, there's so much about what we do that is rooted in compulsories, like just you got to learn your scales, you got to learn this technique, you got to learn that technique, and then you got to, rudimental just rubric. Like everything can be so mechanical, and actually there's historical like proof there that it has been so mechanical. And then you start to get into the 80s and you start to see like this lots of creativity. You start seeing people pushing the envelope with the non-symmetrical drill, and of course the explosion of the indoor activity. And so the amount of creativity that we've seen in like 40 years, I think this is the next step, is like seeing what the students create and giving them that opportunity, inviting them to, basically giving them permission. Because I think that is a huge mental hurdle, is, oh, no one wants to hear what I have to say. What am I going to add to the mix? There's so many, everything's just being inundated at all times. And
well, their education and activity.
Why does what I write matter?
Their education and activity is much higher than ours was when we got started, because they have so much more exposure to it. They're way more groups in general. The ability to watch stuff online, just their IQ for our activity is so much more significantly higher, and it's really cool to see. And then you couple that with their level of technological smarts, and it's like this outpouring of creative energy that, like maybe someone like you or me, when we were starting out, we kind of had that gear, but we had to like stumble in the dark a little bit. And it's like, now you've got probably the same level, or if not more, creative people that just have all the tools like ready at their fingertips, and instructors and clinics and camps and videos and, all sorts of knowledge. It's like really exciting to see how many people can be successful at creating something out of thin air. It's really, really cool. I did have a question. This is kind of along those same lines of, you've got a lot of fans that, they'll transcribe stuff online, or they'll get something that you've written and they'll geek out over it and they're like, oh man, this is so cool. What's that for you right now? Like what are you geeking out over, or who are you listening to that you're like, oh my God, this is so cool?
I feel like you just lobbed it right up to me.
Well, that's because
you already know what my answer is.
I know, but I think it's cool.
Yeah. I could say a lot of things, but right this second, I am so into Devin Townsend. And I know how I got introduced to him, but I don't know how it led. It was very organic, like deep dive into.
Because it turned into, hey, Kevin, check out this one song, to now you're like certified president of the fan club.
Yeah. What a cool guy. I guess part of it is I feel like so much of it, this sounds really weird. I don't know if I could put this, if I can orchestrate my response here. But I see a lot of me when he speaks, and what he's done, and some of the, obviously not in the surface layer, but the fact that we're almost the same age. I think we're like a year apart, and he's had this massive career, like something like 30 albums worth of material, some ridiculous number like that, and nobody's heard of him. And he's not rich, and he's just under the radar, and he's just got probably, you know, this small, well, in the grand scheme of things, a small following that supports him, you know, buys his stuff, and then he's literally doing whatever he wants from album to album. He's constantly changing, and he doesn't have any boundaries. Like he'll be all over the map with idioms and things like breaking the rules, where, you know, you can't do that in a pop song, you know, or you can't do that in an orchestral tune. You can't have choir in this, you know, metal song. And then he's got this really wacky sense of humor. I don't know. I just total man crush. Yeah, he's just awesome. And what's cool about it is I'm really happy that I found him with his current album. Like, I didn't discover some, you know, past album, but his latest album. So I'm seeing like who he is now. Like, this is who he is now. This is what he created. And then I just went, oh, I wonder what he created last year or 2 years ago. And then I found that, and I just kept going back, and it just it's been really interesting. So I tend to do that a lot. I think I mentioned before, other times I've spoken, that I'm into Glenn Phillips and his songwriting. But yeah, I'd say if I had to name two right now, Glenn Phillips is kind of like I'm always into what he's doing. And then say Devin, within the past year, I think it's been maybe a little over a year. Yeah.
How did you stumble across this stuff?
So the webmaster for my site, your site, Jim Wunderlich's site, SCPA, I think he does NCPA as well. His name's Todd Lowe, and he was a snare drummer at Mission Viejo back in the day. Actually, if I'm remembering this correctly, he was section leader. Yes, section leader of the year we did 12. And he just, you know, has a career in web design and other things, technology based. And he's just been doing our sites forever. And he just said, hey, check out, it was one song. It's like, Mike, you need to check out this song. And he just sent me a song. And usually, you know, I'm like, whatever, you know, I'm busy, I'm doing stuff. I'm like, okay. So I listened to it, and immediately I'm just like drawn in, like, what is this insane man right now that's put this together? Who does this?
Which song was that?
I was so fascinated by it. I'm like, what the heck is he doing? And then I immediately said, well, I got to give this guy some money. So I went out and bought the record, and then it was downhill from there. I got CDs coming out my ears. Yes, I still buy records and CDs.
Well, I'm curious, which song was it?
Why?
It was Why. I got it. I had the same reaction, because a lot of times, we talked about this before, like, I have a hard time listening to music in general out of context. Like, my brain just goes into, you know, writing mode. But I remember listening to that for the first time and just be like, how is this from a movie? Why did somebody write this? Like, it sounds funny, but
yeah.
And it's,
well, it is a chapter. Don't get me going down this, because it'll be never ending. It is like a chapter in his latest album where it's a concept album. And it's very, if you listen to it in a linear manner, it tells a story and you can follow it. But yeah, his videos are insane too. But wacky guy.
So maybe let's just kind of circle back in general. Like, you know, we were just talking about students and their desires to move forward. You know, I think one of the other tricky things is, do I need to get a degree? What should I do? And, I always have a hard time with the what should I do question, and part of me is like, well, you got to hustle right now. But at the same time, ideally you're doing one or two groups and you're really pouring your heart into it and learning. And like, I do you feel like, I mean, for me personally, teaching 5 or 6 groups at a time for 4 or 5 years and just being able to churn out a ton of material and like, failing and learning from mistakes was huge.
Yeah, the context is all wrong though. It would be like, I don't know, this popped in my head, but it'd be like, pushing across the plains, getting to California in your covered wagon, and then years, decades later, all those unclaimed territories are now states, and somebody asks you those questions, well, how did you do it, and how do I get started? It's like, I don't know. It was the Wild West. It was like I was going through, tumbleweeds and, gunfights at the local saloon. We're not in that climate anymore. And being at the right place at the right time is real. And nowadays, well, I'll tell you, like, I'll use what you just said, like teaching 5 groups. No, don't ever do that, especially now, because you will never create anything of quality, and you will do your students a disservice because you can't give enough of yourself to them. You will be a nameless, faceless, unknown entity to those groups. And you owe yourself more to be meaningful, to do something meaningful, to matter. I think that's a great question. Did you matter? It's a great reflection after you've achieved something. Was it win at all cost type of attitude with whatever you're doing? Or does it have to matter first, and then winning or being a success or whatever your context is, that's the byproduct. I'm going to share something, like a private discussion that you and I had.
Sure.
So you can edit this out if you don't want to.
Thanks. Put me on the spot.
You said you were asking me, you were doing a project for your Patreon page and you wanted to include battery in your MP3.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, you can include MP3, but don't include the notation because, I have a certain way that I want it to look and blah, blah, blah. And I don't even know if you have the updated, all the little additions and deletions we make throughout the season. Whatever. I just wanted to be in control of the message of the notation part, so I didn't care about the MP3. But you said something to the effect of, I'm paraphrasing, that the pit stuff doesn't have any meaning without the battery stuff, which kind of threw me for a loop a little bit because that's my line. You know what I mean? It's like battery parts are just, what are they? They're just noise. It's like going to the gym and recording the sounds of the barbells hitting the ground and how many push-ups somebody can do. But that's how I've always viewed battery parts. So my first reaction was like, Did
you think I was poking fun at you?
Don't tread on my territory of being useless and meaningless. It's actually kind of cool because I never have to worry about copyright. You can't copyright my stuff. But anyway, I wanted to just, poke at you a little bit and say, what makes you feel that way. And then after we talked about it, I was I guess pleasantly surprised that it was complimentary on your part, that the way we wrote this particular piece, that there was a lot of playing off each other, like what we were doing. And so contextually it would be weird to hear one component and not the other, not hear it as intended. So I understand that part. But yeah, I wanted you to just go down that road a little bit about how you view what battery does to your music. Any battery, not just my stuff, but the stuff you do with Tony and Robert over the years, and whoever else you've written with. But how you see how that affects the way you write, the way you think, your process. Just share why that would be your go-to reaction with when we had that discussion.
Yeah, I think ultimately the road that we ended on is, for sure, context matters. And I think one of the things that I was talking about was, I feel like one of my strengths that I've been cultivating, or what I believe I've been cultivating, if I was going to self-analyze, is feeling good about being a ninja with context. Like feeling like I'm, I don't know if I would call myself a composer. Like I feel, and I don't think there's a lot of like morality to any of the things that I'm saying right now. Like there's no right or wrong. I'm just kind of self-analyzing. But most of the stuff that I'm writing right now, I wouldn't call them like pure compositions, in the sense of someone is just writing by themselves, like it's a solo act, and it's the context is a lot broader than, like I feel more like what I'm doing is I'm creating, I hope I'm creating a piece of art, but it's within like the very specific context of marching percussion, and is in the very specific context of as a team, as a member of a team. And, just like if you wanted to get into the nitty gritty of it, like there's a lot of things that I used to write for concert, like, like at Canyon High School, like concert ensemble. And in that context, I write whatever I want, in whatever tempos that I want, whatever orchestration thickness or thinness that I want, with no real kind of care about visual transition or needs of battery or needs of visual, or, like I feel like there's way more freedom there. Like I would say that in that instance, I felt like a composer, whereas currently with a lot of the stuff that we do, I feel like, to me, the magic is in the collaboration. The magic is in like, for example, I think we were looking at, Blue Nights, from the opener from last year, 2019. And I was talking about like what the front ensemble was playing. It was just very static and minimal. And it was important that it was static and minimal so that the battery roll that went up and down had a meaning, because if the pit was just playing like an interesting part that was just like without the context of the battery parts, then that would be one thing. But it's like we kept it simple for a reason, is so that we could notice these larger gestures, and we can notice like bigger ingredients, and not like fine tooth comb on every single mallet permutation. But it's like, no, the percussion idea for 2.5 minutes was a gesture. It was one composed thing, even though it wasn't composed by one person. It was composed by 3 people, and I think that was kind of where my brain was, because I was like, if I just post the pit MP3, it's like anybody could have written that. If anything, I almost feel like it's, if I was going to write this to stand on its own, I wouldn't have written that. I would have made it fancy.
It's actually one of my pet peeves that battery by itself, like just listening to it. I mean, of course, I'm proud of what I've done, but when you hear it by itself, it's weird, and I think you have to get over it, like in the context of battery. But I totally I get what you're saying. It was cool to hear it, but at the same time it wasn't cool. I was like, wait, hold on a second, like don't don't be so humble that you don't think what you did was great, and because I love what you did with that. But yeah, just thought that was interesting. And
Well, it does speak to our kind of battle is the wrong word, but like our just general sometimes feeling of frustration with the parameters of the adjudication and the activity, especially in DCI, where it's like, at least in the percussion caption, it never felt like context was important. And not because people didn't necessarily think it was important, but just the reality of the judge is on the field 5 feet away from a bass drum. Yeah. How are they going to get the context?
That's a great acknowledgement to make sure that you're never thinking about that. Like, if you're trying to create something, it has to fulfill you and your partners and your program and your kids, and not that, not adjudication. Because I do feel like no matter what venue you're in, or if it's indoor, outdoor, band, drum corps, whatever, I think it's inevitable that the actions of the art form, like everybody, is always ahead of the adjudication. So if we put the brakes on for some sort of pragmatic reason, it just damages the whole thing. Like, just keep barreling forward and don't worry about it.
Right.
And it all works itself out, because eventually it comes back around to where there's recognition of, like, that groundbreaking stuff that was happening, with, I don't know, pick a moment in history. Tom Monk's first book with cadets in '89, like, just like craziness. And I think it was appreciated, obviously, but I think it was more appreciated the more we saw it and the more the community started to respond to it. And I think that's probably that way with everything. So I think that's a good thing to possibly end on, is that you can't allow your mind to get distracted with all that stuff and, like, the context of how others will perceive it. Like, stay focused, because you're always going to hit lizard brain at some moment, and you're going to second guess everything. To what degree, it might vary from person to person, but everybody experiences it. And it can do your project, your endeavor, it can do it an extreme disservice if you go down that road. So I think it's just better to kind of bury your head in the sand, finish what you sought out to do, and then come up for air at the end and be like, ta-da! Oh, you don't like it?
All right, well,
that's cool.
We'll try again
it next year. You know what I mean? Exactly. But I can't be thinking that. I can't be going, what, you don't like it in the middle of the season? That's awful.
You can't be human, Mike? Come on.
Yeah.
No, this is great, because I for sure another day we're going to talk about lizard brain and imposter syndrome, because it's something that I think a lot of people experience, but it's definitely something that we're pretty well versed in feeling a lot. So yeah, let's continue that, because I think that these are great. So awesome.
Right.
Thanks, dude.
Later, Kevin.